Agony dances through my entire body, a screaming pain reaching from scalp to toe. Pure and raw, there is nothing but me and the torture. Yet still, my body moves. My voice speaks clearly, and my hands continue their purpose. I do not flinch. Retreating within myself, I am simply content with the reassurance that the parts of me which actually matter are unaffected by the spell. You are remarkably resistant to trauma, Penelope comments. That line more than anything almost causes me to break my concentration. I look up at her and she shrugs, ending the spell she's been casting to metaphorically set my nerves on fire. At least, I assume it's metaphorical. I take the end of her spell as permission to stop repeating cancel commands and take a deep breath, wincing as my focus returns to my physical body. Penelope showed up at our little hidey hole fairly shortly after Theodora finished torturing me while I practiced cancel commands, and promptly took over the agony herself. She is even more effective at the job, although at least she doesn't seem to take gleeful satisfaction in inflicting pain on me. You know, Penta said the exact same thing, back when that monster attacked and she bit her own limbs off. You remember that? With unfortunate clarity, Penelope sighs. The similarities between myself and the monster that stole my mind aside, you absolutely pass. You are better at not being interrupted than most novice mages. I nod, trying to shake off the lingering pins and needles from Penelope's horribly sadistic spell. Not that using it in this case was sadism, but rather her looking out for my future well-being. I'm about to learn something that can kill me if I lose focus, after all. So we can start then? I ask. We may as well. I'm very curious as to what you want to use these eggs for, but you're just going to pester me about magic until we do this first, aren't you? Definitely, yes. Penelope nods, having clearly expected this. Well, first things first. You'll be happy to know that I have officially gotten the permission necessary to train you. If you do learn some spells, you will be legally allowed to cast them. It's much easier to get this permission for hunters, so that was helpful. Now I have to give you the spiel, though. Channeling is secret. You are not to ever teach anyone about it, not even the slightest hint, because the practice is actually very easy. Unlike the months you spent figuring out your cancel commands, I fully expect you to channel your first chunk of mana in less than an hour. Therein lies the problem. If more people realize that anyone can do it, more idiots will try and you'll increase the number of people blowing themselves up. Hundreds of people die every year attempting to teach themselves these things, so don't go and give them any ideas. You mean like you did with me? That, Penelope says coldly, was not me. At the time I did not at all agree with that monster's insistence on teaching you. My opinion of your ability has since risen considerably, however, so here we are now. Here we are now, I agree, wincing at my second Penta-related faux pas in a row. Practicing cancel commands just makes me think of her, since it was one of the last things we did together. So, how do I do this? I'll show you shortly. Since you're most likely some sort of natural mage, the process will be somewhat instinctive, but there are a few things we can do to help you understand exactly what's happening. That's where we'll start. Theodora, if you would? The undead metamancer starts to cast on me and I let her. Suddenly, I start seeing glowing dust everywhere. It's like I just walked into a thin veil of fog, moving and blowing about the air in beautiful patterns. Is this mana sight? I ask. Got it in one, Penelope confirms, seeming pleased. Come over here, look at some of these metal runes. I follow her, walking over towards one of the many metal-infused ink wards that Theodora and Margaret set up around the room. The glowing particles nearby get sucked into the wards and get immediately replaced, causing a constant stream flowing inward from all directions around them. Magical wards like these functionally use metal in place of a soul. Metal draws in mana, so when it is arranged or engraved with proper commands, that mana automatically gets converted into a spell effect, changing into whatever sort of energy the spell requires. Even though mana is being consumed, you will never have to worry about running out. Mana is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. There is always more. The only thing you have to worry about is how much you can hold inside yourself. Watch me. Penelope starts to channel, which feels much like it always feels to my soul sense. However, thanks to the mana sight spell, I can see the particles of magic swirling inside her soul and quickly changing. The moment it enters her, something about the magic energy alters. It starts moving faster, vibrating almost as if it's angry. This is about the limit of magic I can safely keep inside myself. If I go above this amount, I will start risking strain on my body and presumably on my soul. As such, I can cast a vast number of spells at or below this level of power, but there is a very stark limit to the amount I'm willing to risk going above this. I have done it, despite the danger, especially when we are out hunting. Channeling is very much something you have to learn to get a feel for, so it is common for even the most experienced of mages to strain themselves when in high-stress situations. Your body will try to pull more mana when you are worked up. Which isn't always bad. In a dangerous enough situation you're much more likely to injure yourself by casting a spell that's too weak than you are by casting a spell so strong that you die. Although, minor internal damage is common. I nod along. That all makes sense so far. So, about exploding. Why does that happen, anyway? Penelope chuckles. By its very nature, mana is diffuse. You see it in the air now, but it is in fact everywhere. It permeates walls, the ground. It fills everything to almost exactly the same density. The only natural exceptions to this are elevation, as mana is thicker the lower you go, and metal, which draws more mana into an area. But the unnatural exception to this rule is of course that mana is condensed when channeled. When you squeeze it that tightly, it's constantly attempting to expand back to its normal density. A common misconception is that higher density areas are better for casting mana because there is more mana to use, but again, that doesn't matter. Mana never runs out. The reality is that denser mana zones mean that there's less of a difference between the ambient mana density and the density within your soul when you compress it. This makes it safer to channel more mana than normal. Anyway, you see where I'm going with this. If at any point during your channeling your capacity to hold the mana is less than the mana's capacity to escape, it will escape rather violently. Goodness, Penelope can get wordy when she's explaining stuff. I haven't heard her talk this much since she explained politics. She seems to be having fun, though. Maybe she'd like being a teacher. Okay, so how do I actually channel it? She scoffs at me. Patience. You have no respect for the theory, she grumbles. You have one more thing you need to watch. She flicks her fingers around, and as she does so the mana in her soul twists around into strange and alien shapes. I've seen this sort of shape before, at least kind of. It reminds me very much of how souls themselves are shaped, somehow appearing to move in directions that don't seem like they should exist at all to my physical body. When she completes the cancel command, the mana vanishes, collapsing in on itself like a sinkhole falling in every direction until only nothingness remains. That is what a successful cancel command looks like. If you start wiggling your fingers and that doesn't happen, you need to immediately restart and try again. If you royally fuck up and can't get it to work, try to let the mana out in as small of bursts as possible so that you don't blow your own kidneys out. I frown, thinking about that. Should I also move my soul into my hand or something? That might blow my hand off, but I could survive that with you here, right? Penelope blinks incredulously. Is that something you can do? Well, I genuinely don't know how that would affect things, but if things start looking terrible enough that experimentation is our best option, experiment away. I don't expect you will have many problems, though. Now, here's how we're going to do this. Theodora is going to push a very, very small amount of mana inside of you. Keep your soul where it would rest normally for now, and focus on what it feels like to have that mana within you. It should be nearly identical to how it feels right as you start to activate your talent. I nod, sitting still as Theodora walks up and puts a hand on my belly. I watch her soul as she starts to channel, flicking her fingers around and soon starting to push the vibrating mana inside her soul through her arm and into my body. Then the mana enters my soul and I seize, collapsing to the ground as a scream tears itself free from my throat. Just a few minutes earlier, Penelope had been aggravating every nerve in my body, but this is different. This feels like standing next to Galder again, but 1,000 times worse, the mana burning inside me like fire. Theodora takes her hand off me immediately, shock on her face as Penelope starts to yell. Cancel. Cancel command. I start to move my hands automatically, but within my body something entirely different also starts to happen. I feel my soul clench, power churning as it starts to smother the mana inside it. I keel over, holding my stomach as, before I even complete the cancel command, The mana inside me gets overwhelmed and destroyed. No sound other than my ragged breaths fills the room for some time afterwards, the revenants all crowding worriedly around me. What the fuck was that? Penelope snaps, breaking the silence. I don't have the faintest idea, Theodora answers, glancing at me with genuine concern. She didn't cast anything, but the mana got destroyed. I grimace, slowly sitting up. I take it that this isn't normal, then? Theodora shakes her head, eyes sharp. Behind them she is clearly thinking a mile a minute. With the amount of mana I channeled into you, even if you catastrophically failed a spell it wouldn't have done more than a minuscule amount of internal damage. There simply wasn't enough magic for anything else. It shouldn't have even been painful if you let it burst, let alone simply having it within you. But you didn't even release the mana as a chaos effect, you destroyed it somehow. More silence descends on the room, Vitamin crawling up on my lap to give me a reassuring squeeze. This sucks. It's almost sad how a spell explicitly designed to cause pain doesn't faze me enough to make an impact, but a tiny bit of mana in my soul knocks my ass to the floor. Am I not going to be able to learn magic? Vita has mentioned before that her soul isn't human, Penelope mutters. Here I thought she was just being dramatic. You had the same reaction around Galdra, and that woman called it a sensitivity to channeled mana. I've never heard of such a thing, however. She said in a private talk that it implies animancy involvement, I croak. But how does that work? I don't know. My guess would be that they don't know either, and that they've simply witnessed animancers or people affected by animancy suffer a similar problem. But Theodora channels magic just fine, I point out. And so does Capita. So other people affected by animancy and other people who are animancers both seem to not scream and die because of this. Although, I guess I've only ever seen Capita use a talent. I don't know if she's a learned mage. Part of the reason this is so confusing is because that shouldn't make a single bit of difference, Penelope insists, shaking her head. Watch me use my talent, Vita. I glance at her, mana sight still active from before. She takes a deep breath and I feel the stirring in her soul, mana flowing inside and getting aggravated in exactly the same way that she was showing me before. The only difference is that instead of using her fingers to shape the mana, she pulls it through a series of complicated channels inside her soul, which act like a mold that forces the mana into the desired shape. She completes the spell, and while nothing seems to happen I am probably now inhaling some sort of hopefully harmless disease. You see? Penelope says. You're still pulling in and channeling mana even when you just use a talent, I confirm, and she nods. Remove someone's soul, Vita, Penelope orders. Not mine, obviously. Vitamin or Margaret. Theodora, you said your talent could detect Vita doing that, right? Absolutely, Theodora says. It just seems like a normal spell to me, albeit a complicated and interesting one. So you're right, Vita should have mana in her soul whenever she does that. I shrug, bouncing Vitamin on my lap a little. She grins happily at me, and I murder her again. My daughter's body, still squeezing me tight in a hug, goes limp. Did you see that? Penelope mutters. Theodora nods slowly. I have no idea what that is. Something the mana sight spell isn't designed for at all. I didn't see anything, I say. There hadn't been any mana particles flying around in my soul during that, at least as far as I could tell. Theodora and Penelope look at each other, some sort of non-verbal communication exclusive to huge nerds occurring between them. You know what, how about we do this? Penelope starts. Vita, I'm going to teach you a very, very simple spell. It just converts magical energy into a weak light. It's about the shortest and one of the most useless spells there is, since it lacks any of the focusing elements that would normally make a light spell worthwhile. Still, if we make it dark enough in here it should be a good measurement to figure out if you can even cast at all. What the hell do you mean even cast at all? I demand. I thought you said I definitely use a spell to soul steal. I'm not sure of anything right now, Vita. Just watch my hand and do what I do. It really is a simple spell, and about 10 minutes later Penelope confirms that I have it down. Right, so this time I just want you to imagine that you are trying to pull someone's soul out. But rather than complete that spell, take the feeling of the absolute start, the instant where you start to feel the magic take hold, and just pause. Hold it, push it into your hands, and perform the spell I showed you. That sounds like a lot of steps for something I've never done before, I complain. It is, but if you're a natural mage of some sort, you should pick it up fairly quickly. I scowl, closing my eyes and trying to do as she says. The feeling of pulling out a soul. It's empowering. Something from deep within surges outward whenever I grasp someone's being and pull. It's part of what I am, whatever that may be. Mana is all around me, it's within everything, but I noticed that in its natural state it is never within a person's soul. It only enters when being channeled, and then it's not quite in its natural state anymore. It's more energized, more volatile. Yet to some extent it is still where it belongs. It matches its temporary home. Mana in Penelope's soul is like a square peg in a square hole. But my soul, it reminded me of an immune system, Penelope mutters quietly to Theodora. The mana you put in her attacked like a virus and was destroyed like one. I don't know what that means, but I feel the power building inside me, so I focus on it instead. The strength to kill and shape and shatter. I already know how to push it into my hands. I did that many times before my tentacles were freed from my shell. I move how I was taught, and the power starts to wane away. I open my eyes. Holy shit, Margaret whispers. It's dark in the room, except for a low, almost useless glow on the edges of my fingers. But there is undoubtedly a glow. I've casted a spell. Everyone in the room, except for Vitamin's corpse, obviously, stares at me with an open jaw. So, what does this mean? I ask. Well, it means you can cast spells, Penelope says carefully. So that's good. I feel like there's a but coming. But you can more or less toss out every single thing they just taught you, because you don't seem to be doing it by channeling, Margaret explains. I didn't realize there was an alternative, I say slowly. Yes, well, Penelope answers, a deeply confused scowl on her face. There isn't. I stare blankly at everyone, waiting for them to explain. Don't look at me, Penelope says tiredly. Literally everything casts magic the same way. Mana goes in soul, soul shapes mana, mana transforms into spell effects. That's it, that's magic. Doing it without mana at all, which is what you seem to be doing, makes absolutely zero sense. You're not just breaking the laws of magic at this point, you're breaking conservation of energy. I don't know what that is, I say. Penelope massages her forehead. Theodora? Any ideas? By all appearances, and according to my talent, she is using mana, Theodora insists. We just can't see it for some reason. It doesn't make any sense for her to just be turning mana invisible, Penelope grumbles. Well, more invisible. Margaret? The slime revenant shrugs. She's got to be using mana. Maybe she just uses a different kind of mana. Like, I don't know, the whole rest of the world uses vanilla mana and she can only use chocolate. But there aren't kinds of mana, there's just mana, Penelope insists. What if there is though? Like, yeah, I would have agreed with that statement literally 1 minute ago, but something is happening here that we don't understand. Some of our prior conceptions might just be wrong. But if there's such a thing as chocolate mana, how has no one in the history of the world ever detected or used it for anything? Surely we would have noticed by now if some creatures existed that used a kind of mana that we can't see with standard spells. And surely if this mana existed in nature, it would be causing some sort of effects that we could observe and notice. Someone would say there's this magical effect happening but we don't see the mana causing it, but that has never happened. This mana can't be natural, yet if it doesn't exist in nature, where would Vita be getting it? No one has an answer to that, so the nerds get back to thinking. I join them, trying to figure out the answers to those questions as well. Where am I getting the mana? I close my eyes, taking a deep breath and trying to draw on that power again. I look as far inward as I can, paying attention to the minute moments when I first start to feel the strength that flows through me. It's a comforting, exciting feeling. From somewhere, I draw out strength, pulling it from one of the many impossible directions into which souls reach. But of course, since my soul reaches there, wherever I pull from, isn't that still me? I'm making it, I realize. All eyes turn to me. Except Vitamin's, I guess, so I put her soul back in her body. Eh? What did I miss? She asks, blinking blearily. Margaret clears her throat, answering awkwardly. Well, I'm not entirely sure what the implications of that would be, but I think your mom just claimed to be a god.
Oh.
Yeah, Vitamin nods matter-of-factly. That checks out.
Wait, what?
I ask, staring incredulously.
A god?
Mana comes from the Mistwatcher, Margaret clarifies.
And only the Mistwatcher.
Creating mana isn't possible for mortals like us.
Superstitious bullshit, Penelope argues, looking irritated.
It's true that no one knows any method of creating mana, but that's because there is almost no research in the subject.
No one has tried.
Why would anyone want or need to create more mana?
We have a limitless supply of it.
Penelope, you know that mana creation is theoretically impossible, Theodora argues. Mana is consumed during the casting of a spell. You can't cast a spell that consumes heat or light to create mana.
That's the opposite of what a spell is.
You'd need a spell that converts, well, mana into mana, which would be pointless. Creating mana is not possible.
Except that it obviously is, because it comes from somewhere, Penelope snaps.
Even if that somewhere is the Mistwatcher itself, which may I remind you we have no compelling evidence to suggest other than basic proximity, it is created somehow. Therefore, creating it is possible.
Sure, by something that defies our physical understanding of the world, Margaret drawls. Like, say, a god.
My tendrils curl and uncurl as I listen to the debate on my apparent divinity.
I want to say something, but I have absolutely no idea what.
This isn't exactly the sort of conversation I ever expected someone to have about me.
A god? I sure don't feel like a god. Pretty much my entire life I've spent getting rolled over, ignored, and abused.
What kind of god is that supposed to be? I certainly hesitate to call Vito a god, Theodora says, mirroring my thoughts, but I agree on the other points.
We have stepped into the Mistwatcher's domain. We've always towed the line, what with defying death and all.
But mana is the very substance that causes the world to function. Mana is why the islands fly.
If Vito is a source of that substance, even a new kind of that substance, well,
I can't even begin to guess the implications of that.
Well, here's my take on the implications, Penelope answers derisively.
She's going to have a bitch of a time using any magic since she has to make all of the mana she's using. Otherwise,
not much else.
As exciting and interesting as this is, and don't get me wrong, from a research perspective, Vita, you are a wet dream. From a practical perspective this seems terrible for her future prospects. I frown, nodding a little. I can't use the mana the rest of the world uses.
Something about that is extra surreal, even for a tentacle monster masquerading as a girl.
It's one thing to not be human,
but this is completely different from every other living creature.
Penelope was just talking about how mana couldn't run out, but maybe mine can.
That would be a huge pain in the ass.
Hey,
we don't know that yet, Vitamin insists, valiantly coming to my defense. Nobody knows how this really works, right? Don't just assume it's going to be bad. It sounds super awesome.
Personally, I say slowly, I just don't like all the similarities between me and it that are cropping up.
It?
Penelope asks. The Mistwatcher, I clarify. Even if it doesn't produce mana, it's said to. And now I have soul tentacles, a big eyeball core, the ability to consume souls or store them inside me, and now I produce mana. You have to admit, god or not, it's like I'm a baby Mistwatcher or something. I even recently hatched from an egg. A baby, Penelope says thoughtfully. Well, as an orphan, it would be rather poetic for you to figure out that one or both of your parents are some kind of divine entity, but I greatly question the practicality of such a birth.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Physically, you are human.
Until you start growing tentacles made of flesh, I'll have to stay suspicious about any such relationship.
Well, it's the Mistwatcher.
What if just my soul is whatever the Mistwatcher is?
And my body is just wrong for some reason?
Look, Vita, as interesting as this line of thought is, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. There are plenty of other reasons you could have the similarities.
Besides,
if you are the child of the insanely massive creature below us,
why did it try to kill you?
That gets me thinking, and it gets everyone else staring at me in abject horror.
The Mistwatcher did what? Margaret all but shrieks. Oh, right.
You remember that perception event that happened a few days before we met?
I ask.
Yeah, I caused that just by making eye contact. Bastard attacked me out of nowhere.
Though not in any legal or provable manner, Penelope insists. Yeah, I wave her off. But still. This shit is adding up, Penelope. She scowls at that, but nods slowly. I concede that you are more than just some girl with an obscure talent. But you're hardly some sort of nascent goddess. You're just Vita. Nothing more. Wow, I say, putting a hand over my heart in mock pain like Lynn does when I call her old. Just Vita? You sure know how to make a friend feel appreciated. She jolts with surprise, looking away with a tinge of embarrassment. I didn't say that was a bad thing, she mumbles. You are one of the few people actually worth the time it takes to have a conversation with. So, I appreciate you. Oh, that's sweet. Look at how uncomfortable she is. I wonder if she's ever said that to anyone before. Am I your first friend, Penelope? I ask, smirking. She glowers furiously at me. Let's just get back to the research, she grumbles. You're going to cast that light spell and you're going to cast it as powerfully and as constantly as you can. Theodora, Margaret, you two are going to cycle through mana sight spells and modify as much as you can on the fly to try and get an eye on what she's doing. What about me, boss? Vitamin asks, saluting. I do not care, Penelope answers bluntly. More hugging it is, then. I peel off a shard of myself and smash it, feeding my most adorable daughter some crushed soul dust as a reward for her cuteness. She vibrates a little, giggling as it settles into her being. Amassing heretical power is pleasantly tingly. She says. I know, right? I agree. Quit being cute and start casting, Penelope orders. I roll my eyes, but do as she says. It takes quite a bit of focus to start pulling out the energy again, but soon enough I have a steady stream going into the light spell. More, Penelope says. Scowling, I focus harder. At least Penelope wasn't kidding about this sort of thing being instinctive. It really is just like the feeling of gathering power to pull someone's soul out. I simply move the energy into my hands before sending it through any other bits within me that would shape it. The shaping is manual and not instinctive at all, but the light spell only takes a couple of simple flicks to activate and I can do it over and over without difficulty. The more mana I pour into it, the brighter it glows. More, Penelope demands again. I glare at her but do my best to comply. It's easier said than done. The more power I try to pull in at once, the harder it is to pull at all. Exhaustion quickly starts to set in, a strange sort of pain and weight plaguing my tentacles rather than my physical body. I see something, Theodora suddenly announces. It looks like mana, all right. I can't tell where it's coming from, though. It just seems to be appearing inside her. I told you. I grumble. This is getting really hard, by the way. Well, don't blow yourself up, Penelope says. But if you're anywhere before that point, push harder. I scowl. I don't feel like I'm going to blow myself up, I say. I use this magic in the light spell faster than I can pull it out of my soul. It's just trying to pull it any faster that's difficult. Right, that makes sense, Penelope mutters. It's not a problem for the rest of us, but it would be for you. Stop casting, then. Let's see how much chocolate mana you can hold. Please don't call it that. I do as instructed, however, because as bossy as my friends are they probably know what they're doing. I stop converting mana into light and just let the power build up in my core. More than anything, it just makes me feel bloated. I don't feel under pressure any more than that. It's uncomfortable, but there's no apparent fervor in my mana to violently escape my soul, even as I build the density up further and further. At some point, I simply can't seem to pull any more energy out of wherever the fuck I'm pulling it from. I'm just too clogged. The pathway from where I would draw the mana is so stuffed with it that I lack the strength to condense it any further. Okay, I grunt. That's it, that's all I can hold. I literally can't pull in any more. It's not really that much, Theodora comments. I'm weirdly offended by that. Okay, well if it's not going to hurt her, see if you can release a small amount out into the atmosphere, Penelope says. If you damage yourself, I'll patch you right up. I nod, and almost gratefully let some of the mana stream out. I wince, expecting it to blast through parts of my body, but that doesn't happen. It just exits, calmly and without fanfare. It's getting destroyed, Theodora reports.
So that explains why we don't see any of this in nature, I suppose. Just to see if I can, I let all of the mana out at once. Theodora jumps back a bit, and a terrible screeching sound erupts for a brief moment where I assume my mana and the world's mana collide and fight each other. The world no doubt wins, and Penelope and I rub our ears to try and massage some of the pain out. Well, at least I don't have to worry about blowing myself up, I say. I don't even know where to start with this, Penelope says, but overall, as incredibly interesting as it is, I don't think we really should be focusing on researching this. Vito is strange. Everyone here knew that. But I can show you spells, and you can apparently still use the spells, and that's really what matters. Once we're immortal we'll have all the time we need to figure out what the fuck is up with her. I nod. As interested as I am in what this means, I suppose she has a point. Well, to that end I think those eggs might be of use. When I was out in the forest, I accidentally broke one of them. Inside was a baby monster, but it didn't have a soul. Yet it could still move around and stuff like that. Once it started to, the Mistwatcher reached up and gave it a soul, but it was just fine beforehand. Penelope's eyebrows raise. So you think things can live before even having a soul in the first place? Yep, I nod. It freaked me the fuck out. I think losing your soul kills you because of how the soul attaches to the body, not because they're essential to life. But I have no idea what a body without a soul would be or how it would work. The whole idea freaks me out. But now I'm thinking, what if I do what the Mistwatcher does and put a soul into a living thing rather than a dead one? What would happen? Penelope shrugs, but I know if there's one thing I can always rely on Penelope for, it is not missing an opportunity for blasphemy. Let's find out, she says. Wait, Margaret says, holding up her hands. How can souls not be the most important element of life? The three of us are nothing but souls at this point. Our bodies aren't doing anything other than keeping us inside and for some reason preventing us from getting grabbed by the Mistwatcher. None of us have any idea why the hell the Mistwatcher only grabs souls if they're not in bodies, but we've confirmed that is absolutely what's happening. When I put a soul into a corpse, it pretty much stays in there for as long as I want. But if I leave a soul lying around or put it in an object like my spear or the beautiful and perfect Roscoe, it's only a matter of time before a tentacle reaches up and eats it. Sometimes the tentacle shows up within a few minutes, and sometimes it takes upwards of several hours. There doesn't seem to be any particular connection between things that cause it to take longer, it appears to be random. Still, never once has the Mistwatcher grabbed a soul from a body. At least not with one of its spiritual tendrils. The physical one certainly tried to separate my soul from my body. That's a valid point, Penelope says. I think the only way we're going to be able to answer that is if we figure out a method of getting a living being in here without a soul and keeping it that way long enough to research. You said that the Mistwatcher placed a soul in the monster as soon as you broke the egg? Yes, that's right, I confirm. So let's beat it to the punch. Well, do it already. I do exactly that, making a soul shard and walking over to the pile of unhatched eggs. Placing it inside one of them, I feel it take hold into the unborn monster. However, it doesn't at all feel like what happened when the Mistwatcher did the same thing. My shard is doing exactly what it would do to a corpse, an object, or any other inanimate thing I would place it in. It spreads out those net-like veins around the inside of the body, giving it motion where in a corpse there would be none. Of course, this body is alive, so it should be perfectly capable of moving itself without the assistance of my shard. Well, I think I've fucked it up somehow, I say. This doesn't feel right at all. Get out of that egg. All of my revenants flinch at the order, but since none of them are currently inside an egg they quickly realize I'm not talking to them. The baby pentapede, however, recognizes me immediately. Or more accurately, the baby is fully unconscious, but my shard acknowledges me and forces it to move. My soul shard strains inside the tiny monster, causing its legs to jerk out and smash against the inside of the shell. Soon, the beast is free from its prison, but now it is also awake. It doesn't seem to appreciate having something control its body from the inside. There is no seamless transition, no unity between soul and flesh. My shard puppets the creature, ignoring its muscles, but the muscles are still fully functional. The baby strains and fights and screams as its first experience in the world is a horrific internal agony, a foreign will trying to wrest control of its body, counter to all of its instincts and desires. Yeah, This is kind of creepy, Vitamin opines. This isn't at all what it looked like when the Mistwatcher put souls in these things, I confirm. It's neat how it's actually kind of working, though. We gotta wait and see if the Mistwatcher tries to replace the soul, even though I kinda fucked it up. I point at the struggling, terrified baby monster. Don't move. Its muscles struggle to disobey me, but my soul shard locks its joints and keeps it in line. I grin, pleased that such a tiny fraction of myself can dominate a living creature. It is interesting how much the baby is fighting, however. I mean, it literally just hatched. I suppose monsters and many animals start out much more developed than humans do, capable of walking almost as soon as they're born. They must be born with instincts to attempt to walk as well, and to either fear or attack creatures like us. Humans aren't like that, though. I wonder how a baby human would develop with a shard like this inside them. Would they just never know how strange it is? Would they even be able to function without a Mistwatcher soul inside them? While we wait for a Mistwatcher tendril to possibly pop up, I get to practicing on the other soulless eggs. The next one I do the same thing, just for consistency's sake, and we get the same sort of creature. After that, I try to do what I did in the forest and modify my soul shards to get more of the result I want. I don't feel any guiding instinct, though. It is as if the idea is there, but just out of reach. It's something I almost understand, something that won't fully enter my mind until I'm up late at night, unable to sleep. It feels like struggling to remember a word and having it just at the tip of my tongue, but it is ultimately forgotten. After another hour, a Mistwatcher tendril does raise up from the ground, but notably it does not bother either of my sharded monsters. It places a soul inside one of the eggs instead, and departs. I try to examine the Mistwatcher's shard as closely as I can, but it's just too complex, and while I still struggle to decipher it, yet another tendril puts a fresh soul in one of the 5 remaining eggs. It looks like I have a time limit on this, I grumble, but I just can't seem to figure it out. Is the Mistwatcher still not bothering the ones you modified, at least? Theodora asks. No, they're still untouched, I confirm. Can you remove your current soul shard from one of the monsters without killing it? Penelope asks. I raise an eyebrow. I think so, actually. It doesn't damage a corpse when I remove a revenant soul from it, so. Penelope looks at Theodora, her soul suddenly alight with excitement. Well then. Hypothetically, would it be possible to move a revenant soul between living bodies that have no other souls in them? Penelope presses. I don't see why not, I say. I could stick Vitamin in one of the eggs just as easily as I could put her in any other body. Or, man. Vitamin complains. But Mom, I just upgraded from rat. I ruffle her hair, but not too hard because I don't want it to fall out. It was just an example, honey, I assure her. That's our in, then. Penelope says excitedly. Rather than trying to de-age a body, we could make new bodies, and keep one of Vita's souls in them so that they don't gain one of their own. Then, with the right magic, we could simply move older people into the younger bodies. Making the body older is substantially easier than making it younger, so if we just figure out how to clone. Then you still run into the problem of my revenants not actually controlling the body's muscles, but instead just pulling the body around with soul force, I point out. Then figure out how to fix that, Penelope orders, pointing at me. It will take us plenty of time to figure out how to make the clones anyway, but I already have a few ideas for artificial wombs, so we should see. She starts babbling stuff I don't understand, but she seems very happy about it, so I take that as a good sign. I smile, starting to zone out a little as she prattles on. Penelope is a weird friend. She is a friend though, I think. As snippy and arrogant as she can be, something about the way she gets so animated when talking about her interests has me grinning every time. It's such a treat to see, with how grumpy she normally is. We've been through a lot of ups and downs, but listening to the beautiful and joyful song in her soul right now, it feels very worth it to have met her. I'm glad to have the break. I haven't had a rest since before Angeline died. Of course, as soon as I think that, the next thing I know I'm waking up the next day,